all acting or of all artists. And I don't really understand what Ken's saying, because I don't think you would call it a stylized film in any way. It's not like an 18th century comedy, for instance. It was a perfectly human story, and as modern as they come, really.
They called her the most beautiful woman in Hollywood, but nobody talked about what happened behind closed doors. She gave up her own daughter, survived electroshock therapy, and watched the love of her life walk away forever. Marlon Brando wanted her, Laurence Olivier worshipped her, and yet she died completely alone. Vivien Leigh won 2 Oscars, conquered Hollywood, and still lost everything that actually mattered.
Oh, I like doing a great many things. I love living in the country, I love gardening, I love reading, I love writing, I like painting, I love looking at painting, I like listening to music, I like my work, really above all, I suppose, and I like being with my friends.
The woman who played Scarlett O'Hara could survive a civil war on screen, but she could not survive her own mind. The truth is far darker than anything you have seen in Gone with the Wind. Vivien Leigh is widely regarded as one of the greatest actresses of the 20th century. Her performances in some of Hollywood's most celebrated films earned her a place in cinema history that very few actors have managed to match. But behind the glamour and the talent was a woman whose life was shaped just as much by hardship as it was by success. To understand who Vivien Leigh really was, it helps to go back to the very beginning, long before the cameras, the applause, and the awards. She was born on November 5th, 1913, in Darjeeling, India, a hill station in the far northeast of the country that was then under British colonial rule. Her full name at birth was Vivian Mary Hartley. Her father, Ernest Hartley, was of Scottish descent and worked as a clerk in the Indian civil service. Her mother, Gertrude, had Irish roots, though some accounts have suggested she may also have had Armenian or Indian ancestry. This particular detail was something that Leigh would later go to great lengths to keep out of public conversation. In the early decades of Hollywood, where image was everything, and audiences had very fixed ideas about who belonged on screen, having anything other than a purely European background could seriously damage a career before it even got started. So Leigh kept that part of her heritage private, a decision that tells you something about the world she was trying to break into and the compromises it demanded from the very start. Her early childhood in India was relatively comfortable by the standards of British colonial life, but it was also somewhat unsettled. When Vivian was around 6 years old, her parents made the decision to send her back to England to receive a proper education. She was enrolled at the Convent of the Sacred Heart in Roehampton, a prestigious Catholic boarding school on the outskirts of London. For a young girl who had grown up in India and was suddenly placed in an unfamiliar country, surrounded by strangers, the transition must have been difficult. What made it even harder was that after dropping her daughter off, her mother Gertrude returned to India, and Vivian did not see her again for 2 full years. That kind of separation at such a young age tends to leave a mark on a child, and in Vivian's case, it appears to have pushed her inward in certain ways. Unable to share her feelings openly with her parents, she turned to her school friends instead. By all accounts, she was a bright and personable girl, and she was not shy about sharing her ambitions. She told her classmates quite plainly that she intended to become a great actress one day. It was the sort of declaration that many children make and most forget, but in her case, she meant it entirely, and she would spend the rest of her life proving it. After finishing her schooling, she went on to study at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, one of the most respected drama schools in the world. It seemed like the natural next step for someone with her level of ambition and ability, but her time there was cut short, and the reason was a man. In the early 1930s, Vivian met a barrister named Herbert Lee Holman. He was educated, well-spoken, and moved in respectable social circles. He was also 13 years older than her, which made the relationship slightly unconventional by the standards of the time, though not unusually so. Despite the age gap, or perhaps because of it, Vivian was drawn to him. The relationship moved quickly, and she made the decision to leave the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art to be with Holman. It was a significant sacrifice, walking away from a formal training program at one of the country's leading institutions. But at that point in her life, her feelings for Holman appeared to outweigh her professional plans. The couple married on December 20th, 1932. Vivian was 19 years old. Just 10 months later, in October 1933, she gave birth to their daughter, Suzanne. Motherhood arrived early for Vivian, and while she clearly cared for her daughter, it quickly became apparent that domestic life alone was never going to be enough for her. The ambition she had spoken about so openly as a schoolgirl had not gone anywhere. If anything, it had grown stronger. As she began to pursue acting work in earnest, one practical issue presented itself almost immediately. Her name. Her agent was direct about it, telling her that Vivian Holman was simply not the kind of name that would stand out in the entertainment industry. It lacked a certain quality that a stage name needed to have. A number of suggestions were apparently put forward and rejected, with Vivian finding most of them awkward or unappealing. Eventually, she settled on a solution that felt more personal. She took her new last name from her husband's middle name, which was Leigh. As for her first name, she adjusted the spelling slightly, changing Vivian to Vivian, which had a softer and somewhat more distinctive quality to it. And so Vivien Leigh was born, not just as a stage persona, but as the name by which the world would come to know her. With her new name in place and her determination firmly intact, she set about building a career. The break she needed came in 1935 when she was 22 years old. She landed the role of Henriette in a play called The Mask of Virtue, a production that caused considerable excitement in London, theatre circles at the time. The role was considered a demanding one, with a character whose morality was deliberately ambiguous and whose story touched on themes that many considered scandalous for the era. Leigh threw herself into the part completely, and the response from audiences and critics alike was remarkable. She received standing ovations and a wave of positive reviews that pushed her name to the front of people's minds almost overnight. It was the kind of debut that actors spend years working towards, and she had achieved it in a single performance. Around the same time, in the midst of this sudden surge in her public profile, Leigh attended a theatrical production in London starring an actor who had been generating a great deal of excitement of his own. His name was Laurence Olivier. Leigh watched his performance from the audience and, according to those who were with her that evening, turned to a friend afterwards and stated quite matter-of-factly that she was going to marry him. The fact that she was already married, and that Olivier himself was also married at the time, did not appear to dampen her certainty in the slightest. It was a moment that, looking back, seems to capture something essential about who Vivien Leigh was. Once she decided she wanted something, very little stood in her way. After the curtain came down on The Mask of Virtue, Vivien Leigh wasted no time in pursuing the two things she had fixed her sights on. One was a career at the very top of the acting world. The other was Laurence Olivier. Both pursuits would define the next several years of her life, and both would come with a cost that she could not have fully anticipated at the time. Following her appearance backstage at the theatre where Olivier had been performing, the two began to see more of each other. Leigh had introduced herself to him in his dressing room after the show, and by most accounts the meeting left a strong impression on both of them. Olivier was already being talked about as one of the most exciting stage actors of his generation. And Leigh, fresh off the success of The Mask of Virtue, was rapidly becoming a name to watch herself. On the surface, they were simply two ambitious actors moving in the same professional circles. But it did not take long for things to develop beyond that. The opportunity for their relationship to move forward in a more concrete way came when Leigh was cast opposite Olivier in a film called Fire Over England, released in 1937. The production was a large-scale historical drama with a considerable budget behind it, and landing a role in it represented another significant step forward for Leigh's career. But the professional dimension of the project quickly became secondary to what was happening between the two leads on set. By the time filming wrapped, Leigh and Olivier were involved in a full relationship, one that both of them understood would have serious consequences given that they were each still married to other people. Olivier was married to the actress Jill Esmond, with whom he had a young son. Leigh, of course, was still married to Herbert Lee Holman, and they had their daughter Suzanne together. The situation was complicated, and by the social standards of the late 1930s, deeply sensitive. Divorce carried a significant stigma at the time, and for two public figures whose careers depended in part on how the public perceived them, the stakes were high. As a result, the relationship was kept as quiet as possible for as long as possible. Though in the close world of British theatre and film, complete secrecy was never a realistic prospect. While all of this was unfolding in her personal life, Leigh's professional ambitions were pointing her firmly in the direction of Hollywood. She had already made several films in Britain and had proven herself as a serious actress on the stage, but the real prize, the kind of global recognition that only American cinema could offer at that time, remained just out of reach. That changed when news began to circulate that the American producer David O. Selznick was planning to adapt Margaret Mitchell's enormously popular novel Gone with the Wind for the screen. Leigh had come across the novel while recovering from a broken ankle, spending her time in bed working through its pages. She was immediately gripped by it, and in particular by the character of Scarlett O'Hara, the story's fiercely independent and morally complicated heroine. By the time she finished reading it, Leigh had made up her mind that she wanted to play that role. This was not an idle wish. It was a decision, and she pursued it with the same single-minded determination that had brought her this far. The search for an actress to play Scarlett O'Hara had become something of a cultural event in itself. Selznick conducted a lengthy and very public casting process, and the role was considered one of the most coveted in Hollywood. Hundreds of actresses were considered, or tested, including many of the biggest names in American film at the time. Leigh was not an obvious candidate as far as Selznick was concerned. He was aware of her talent and her growing reputation, but he felt that she was simply too English for the part. Scarlett O'Hara was an icon of the American South, and the idea of a British actress taking on that role struck him as a potential problem. After an initial approach on her behalf, Selznick essentially moved on, assuming the matter was settled. It was not settled. Leigh continued to push for a chance to prove herself, and an important connection helped her get one. Selznick's older brother Myron happened to be Laurence Olivier's agent, which meant that Leigh had a direct line into the producer's inner circle. Myron Selznick believed that Leigh was right for the part and arranged for her to meet his brother. The meeting led to a screen test, and the screen test, by all accounts, was remarkable. Whatever reservations Selznick had held about casting a British actress as Scarlett O'Hara, what he saw on screen was apparently enough to set them aside. Vivien Leigh was given the role. The production of Gone with the Wind was by any measure an extraordinary undertaking. Filming stretched across many months, with Leigh regularly working days that lasted up to 16 hours. The sheer scale of the project, the number of scenes, the elaborate sets, and the logistical complexity of the whole thing put enormous pressure on everyone involved. The production went through not one but 3 directors during the course of filming, which gives some sense of how turbulent the whole process was behind the scenes. The atmosphere on set was often difficult, and the cast, despite their professionalism, were under significant strain. Leigh worked considerably longer hours than her co-star Clark Gable, yet her salary was a fraction of his. Both actors, worn down by the seemingly endless production, apparently shared a conviction that the finished film was going to disappoint audiences. Given the chaos that surrounded its making, that was perhaps an understandable conclusion to reach. They were, however, spectacularly wrong. Gone with the Wind was released in December 1939 and became an immediate sensation. It drew audiences in vast numbers and received widespread critical acclaim. When adjusted for inflation, it remains to this day the highest-grossing film ever made, a fact that speaks to just how deeply it captured the public imagination at the time. For Vivien Leigh, the film did everything she had hoped it would, and more. Her portrayal of Scarlett O'Hara was praised as the defining performance of the film, a display of range and intensity that left a lasting impression on everyone who saw it. The recognition of her work came at the Academy Awards ceremony in February 1940. Leigh was 26 years old when she collected the Oscar for Best Actress, becoming one of the youngest recipients of that award at the time. It was a remarkable achievement for someone who had only recently broken into the international film industry, and it cemented her reputation as one of the leading actresses of her generation. The evening itself, however, did not end entirely on a high note. Leigh and Olivier attended the ceremony together, their relationship now more openly acknowledged, and by all accounts, the night began joyfully enough. But on the journey home, something shifted. Olivier, according to his own son Tarquin, was struggling with feelings of jealousy over Leigh's win. He reportedly took hold of her Oscar at one point and came close to striking her with it, though he managed to stop himself. He later admitted that he had been consumed by jealousy that night. It was a jarring contrast to the celebration that the evening should have been, and it offered an early glimpse of the tensions that would come to define their relationship in the years ahead. Despite that difficult end to the night, 1940's, A hole represented a turning point for both of them. After months of legal proceedings, both Leigh and Olivier finalized their divorces from their previous spouses. The process came with painful conditions on both sides. As part of their respective divorce agreements, each of them had to surrender primary custody of their children. Leigh's daughter Suzanne remained in the care of Herbert Lee Holman, and Olivier's son stayed with Jill Esmond. It was a sacrifice that both of them had agreed to in order to be together, but it was not a small one, and it would cast a long shadow over the years that followed. With those legal matters finally resolved, Leigh and Olivier were free to marry, and they did so quietly, with the actress Katharine Hepburn serving as matron of honor at the small ceremony. After years of navigating a relationship that had to be kept largely out of public view, they were at last an official couple. To many observers, they seemed like the perfect pairing, two of the most talented and celebrated actors of their time, now united both professionally and personally. The reality, as it so often is, was considerably more complicated than it appeared from the outside. The years that followed Leigh and Olivier's marriage should, on paper, have been among the happiest of their lives. They were together at last, both at the height of their professional powers, and newlywed after years of keeping their relationship hidden from the world. But the reality of life together proved far more difficult than either of them had perhaps imagined. The pressures that had been building quietly beneath the surface for some time began, gradually and then quite suddenly, to make themselves known. Leigh had already shown signs of what would later be understood as bipolar disorder during her stage work in the late 1930s. One particularly alarming episode occurred while she was performing in a stage production of Hamlet, in which she was playing Ophelia. Olivier stepped into her dressing room at some point during the run, and Leigh immediately began screaming at him with a ferocity that stunned those who witnessed it. Then, just as abruptly as it had started, she stopped. She carried on as though nothing had happened at all, apparently unaware of what she had just done. It was deeply unsettling for everyone present, and it was far from an isolated incident. Over time, these episodes would become more frequent, more intense, and harder for those around her to manage. At the same time, her career continued to move forward, though not always in the directions she had hoped. After the extraordinary success of Gone with the Wind, there was enormous pressure on Leigh to follow it up with something equally impressive. That proved difficult. She was turned down for the lead role in Olivier's film Rebecca, a part she very much wanted, and she also made the decision to decline the lead in Pride and Prejudice, a choice she would later come to regret. The roles she did take during this period failed to make much of an impression with audiences or critics, and after the extraordinary heights of her Oscar win, the contrast was stark and discouraging. Her personal struggles were deepening at the same time. In 1943, while she was in North Africa as part of a tour to entertain Allied troops during the Second World War, Leigh fell seriously ill. It took until 1944 for a proper diagnosis to be made, and when it came, it was a serious one. She had tuberculosis, a disease that at the time still carried significant risks and required careful management. She spent time in hospital and eventually appeared to recover, at least to the degree that doctors felt comfortable allowing her to return to normal life. What they did not fully appreciate, and what would only become clear much later, was that the illness had not been entirely resolved. The tuberculosis had gone quiet, but it had not gone away. Throughout the mid-1940s, Leigh was dealing with a combination of physical illness, professional disappointment, and the escalating effects of her mental health condition. Bipolar disorder, as it is understood today, involves cycles of extreme emotional states, periods of intense energy and elevated mood, followed by episodes of deep depression. In Leigh's case, those cycles were severe, and the depressive episodes in particular were becoming harder for her to bear. Her insomnia worsened. Her ability to regulate her impulses became more unreliable, and the outbursts that had been occasional events in earlier years were now happening with greater regularity. In 1945, while filming the historical drama Caesar and Cleopatra, a serious accident occurred on set. A scene required Leigh to run across a freshly polished floor. She fell. At the time of the accident, she was pregnant, and the fall caused her to miscarry. The loss devastated her and pushed her into a deep depression that took a long time to lift. It was not the first time she had experienced a miscarriage, and it would not be the last, but the circumstances of this one happening so suddenly and in such a public environment made it particularly difficult to process. The strain on her marriage to Olivier was becoming more visible. Leigh's condition affected every aspect of their life together, and Olivier, despite his genuine feelings for her, was finding it increasingly hard to cope with the unpredictability of her behavior. According to people who were close to them during this period, the episodes could be terrifying. Her voice would change during a breakdown, becoming harsh and cutting, and her eyes, according to her agent, would take on a quality that made her seem like a completely different person. Afterwards, Leigh would have no memory of what had happened. She would feel frightened and ashamed, aware that something had occurred, but unable to account for it. It was also during this period that Leigh began to have affairs outside her marriage. Her bipolar disorder, it has been noted by those who have written about her life, significantly affected her libido, leading to intense and at times uncontrollable urges that she struggled to manage. She sought intimacy outside her marriage on multiple occasions, with various individuals, and while Olivier was aware of what was happening, he found himself in an almost impossible position. He loved her, but he was exhausted, and the situation between them was deteriorating. Things took a further turn when Olivier, while touring in Australia, came across a young actor named Peter Finch. Impressed by what he saw, Olivier brought Finch into his company and gave him a significant professional opportunity. Finch repaid that generosity in a way that Olivier could not have anticipated. He began an affair with Leigh. By the time it became known to Olivier, reports suggest that he had reached a point of such emotional exhaustion that his reaction was closer to resignation than outrage. The life he and Leigh had built together was under enormous pressure, and the affair with Finch was simply one more weight on a structure that was already close to breaking. Amid all of this, Leigh was offered a role that would produce what many consider the greatest performance of her career. Tennessee Williams had written a new stage play called A Streetcar Named Desire, and the central character, a fragile, deluded, and ultimately tragic woman named Blanche Dubois, was exactly the kind of demanding, complex role that Leigh was drawn to. She threw herself into the part completely, performing it on stage in London to enormous critical acclaim over the course of more than 300 performances. Those who saw her in the role spoke about the performance in terms that went beyond ordinary praise. Leigh understood Blanche Dubois in a way that felt deeply personal, and it showed. The character's instability, her desperate need to believe in illusions, her inability to face the world as it actually was, these were qualities that Leigh could access from somewhere close to her own experience. It was extraordinary work, but it came at a genuine cost. Leigh herself admitted that inhabiting Blanche Dubois for so long and so completely had pushed her further into her own mental instability. She said that playing the role had tipped her into madness, and while that might sound like the kind of dramatic statement an actor makes to describe a difficult job, in her case, it was closer to a literal truth. When Hollywood decided to adapt the play for the screen, Leigh was not the director Elia Kazan's automatic choice for the role. He had reservations about whether she could translate her stage performance to film, and there were questions about whether an American studio would want a British actress in such a quintessentially American story. Leigh was undeterred. She made her case, convinced Kazan to give her the opportunity, and delivered a film performance that matched, and in some respects, surpassed what she had achieved on stage. Her co-star was Marlon Brando, already being spoken of as one of the most exciting actors of his generation. Brando later said that he had considered pursuing a romantic involvement with Leigh, but had held back out of respect for his friendship with Olivier. Whether or not that account is entirely accurate, it speaks to the impression Leigh made on those she worked with. The film was released in 1951, and Leigh's performance was met with the kind of response that only comes when an actor does something truly exceptional. She received her second Academy Award for Best Actress, becoming one of a very small number of performers to win the award more than once. It was a remarkable professional achievement, particularly given everything she had been carrying in her personal life during the years it had taken to get there. But just as had happened with her first Oscar, the triumph was followed almost immediately by a period of darkness. The pattern was becoming a familiar one in Leigh's life, a surge upwards followed by a fall. Success shadowed so closely by suffering that it was sometimes difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. Her mental health continued to deteriorate, and the next chapter of her life would bring challenges that made everything she had already been through look manageable by comparison. The years following her second Academy Award were among the most turbulent of Vivien Leigh's life. The professional recognition she had worked so hard to achieve offered little protection against what was happening to her privately. And as the 1950s progressed, the gap between her public image and the reality of her day-to-day existence became increasingly difficult to bridge. In 1953, Leigh was cast in a film called Elephant Walk, a production that was expected to mark her return to major Hollywood cinema. Instead, it became the setting for one of the most severe breakdowns of her career. On set, her mental state deteriorated rapidly. Her insomnia, which had been a persistent problem for years, worsened considerably. She began to experience paranoia, losing trust in the people around her and interpreting ordinary events as threats. At certain points, she hallucinated. Olivier had not accompanied her to the location shoot, and his absence left her without the one person who, whatever the difficulties between them, knew how to handle her episodes with some degree of familiarity. In his place, she found comfort in the company of Peter Finch, her former lover, who was also part of the cast. Paramount Studios, unwilling to halt production while waiting for Leigh to stabilize, made the decision to replace her. The actress brought in to take over her role was Elizabeth Taylor. Leigh was placed on a flight back to Los Angeles, and during the journey, her distress became so acute that those on board found the situation genuinely alarming. She was completely unable to contain what she was experiencing, and by the time she arrived back in England, it was clear that she needed immediate professional help. Olivier, faced with a situation that had gone beyond anything he could manage on his own, made the decision to have her admitted to a psychiatric facility. She spent 3 months there, during which she underwent multiple sessions of electroshock therapy, a treatment that was far more widely used at that time than it is today, though its effects on the patient were significant and often deeply distressing. The news of her breakdown became public, as it almost inevitably would give her profile, and the coverage was not always kind. Her marriage to Olivier did not survive the years that followed. The two of them had been through an enormous amount together, and Olivier had stayed far longer than many people in his position might have. But by the mid-1950s, the relationship had reached a point of exhaustion that neither of them could push past. In 1956, Leigh suffered another miscarriage while performing in a Shakespearean production on a European tour, and the loss sent her into another severe depressive episode. During this period, while touring with a production of Titus Andronicus, she had a breakdown serious enough to attract public attention. There were incidents that those around her found frightening and impossible to manage. Olivier, after nearly 2 decades together, finally reached the end of what he was able to give. He left Leigh and went on to form a relationship with the actress Joan Plowright. Looking back on the relationship in later years, Olivier said that he had never loved anyone as deeply as he had loved Vivien Leigh. But he also acknowledged that her illness had made it impossible for him to stay. It was not a simple ending, and it did not appear to be a painless one for either of them. After the divorce was finalized in 1960, Leigh was not without support. An actor named Jack Merivale, who was fully aware of her condition and its implications, stepped into her life and committed to caring for her. Olivier, for his part, made an effort to remain on reasonable terms with his former wife. He wrote her a letter in the aftermath of their separation that acknowledged the difficulty of what she had been through and expressed genuine admiration for the way she had conducted herself during an enormously painful time. Leigh continued to work through the early 1960s, though the work itself was not always easy to get through. In 1963, she appeared in a stage musical called Tovaric, and while she ultimately received a Tony Award for her performance, the production was marked by serious incidents. Her behavior on stage became at times unpredictable and uncontrollable, with reports of her forgetting lines, rushing through musical numbers at the wrong tempo, and on at least one occasion, physically confronting a fellow cast member while a full audience watched. She had to be restrained and sedated on certain occasions during the run. Her final film appearance came in 1965 in a production called Ship of Fools. During the filming of an assault scene, Leigh struck her co-star Lee Marvin with a high-heeled shoe, with enough force to leave a permanent scar on his face. It was an incident that reflected the degree to which her condition had made certain kinds of professional work genuinely dangerous. Ship of Fools would be the last film she ever made. By the summer of 1967, the tuberculosis that had first made itself known back in 1943 had returned. Leigh was at home, attempting to rest and recover when she got up during the night and collapsed. Her partner, Jack Merivale, found her shortly afterwards. She had already died. She was 53 years old. When the news became public, the response in London was immediate and deeply felt. The city's theatres, as a mark of respect, turned out their lights for an hour. It was a tribute that spoke to the place Leigh had occupied not just in the film industry but in the broader cultural life of the country. Olivier, despite the years that had passed since their separation, travelled to pay his respects and helped Merival with the arrangements for her funeral. Her ashes were scattered near her home, a place she had loved. In the weeks before his own death, many years later, Olivier was reportedly watching one of Leigh's films when he began to cry. He said simply that what he was watching was love. Leigh had expressed something similar from her own side. She once said that she would rather have lived a short life alongside Olivier than face a long one without him. Whether or not that feeling sustained her through everything she endured, it is clear that the connection between them was one of the defining realities of her life, complicated and painful as it often was. Vivien Leigh left behind 2 Academy Awards, a Tony Award, and a body of work that continues to be studied and admired. But perhaps more than any specific performance, what endures is the sense of someone who gave everything she had, on stage, on screen, and in life, and who paid an enormous personal price for doing so.